You are lying in near complete darkness, your body pressed against rough wooden planks that smell of smoke and old sweat. The air inside the longhouse is thick, so thick you can taste it. A mixture of wood smoke, damp wool, unwashed bodies, and something else, the heavy animal warmth of 40 people breathing in the same sealed space. Outside, beyond the turf-covered walls, a winter storm howls across the Norwegian fjord, driving snow horizontally through the darkness. The temperature has plummeted to well below freezing, but here in this strange cocoon of smoke and humanity you are not freezing. You should be, by all logic, in this dark age structure with no glass windows, no insulation as we understand it, no heating beyond a single hearth. You should be slowly succumbing to hypothermia. Yet you are not. The Vikings solved a problem that modern humans with all our technology would struggle to survive without central heating and sleeping bags. How did they do it? Before we descend deeper into the smoky darkness of the Longhouse, take a moment to join our community. Subscribe to keep exploring these forgotten corners of human history, and leave a comment below telling us which aspect of Viking domestic life surprises you most. Your engagement helps us continue building these immersive historical journeys. You run your hand along the interior wall beside your sleeping platform. The surface is surprisingly complex, not the rough timber you might expect, but something denser, more organic. This is turf, cut from the earth in thick blocks and stacked 3 feet deep around the wooden frame of the longhouse. Your fingers trace the compressed layers of grass roots, soil, and plant matter that have merged into a solid living mass. The turf is cold to the touch, yes, but not dangerously so. It holds something back, the killing frost that right now is crystallizing the breath of anyone foolish enough to be outside. Here is what every documentary tells you: Viking longhouses used turf walls for insulation. But here is the quirky reality that specialists puzzle over: these walls were not meant to be perfectly sealed. Small gaps existed between the turf blocks, deliberate imperfections in the construction that allowed the structure to breathe. Modern builders would call this catastrophic heat loss. Vikings called it survival. The moisture from 40 breathing, sweating, cooking humans had to escape somehow, or the interior would become a breeding ground for deadly mold and respiratory disease. The longhouse walls existed in a delicate balance, thick enough to slow heat loss, porous enough to prevent toxic humidity buildup. You notice something else as your eyes adjust to the darkness. The walls are not vertical. They slope inward slightly, meeting the turf-covered roof at an angle. This is no accident. Scholars continue to debate whether this architectural choice was primarily structural, preventing the heavy turf roof from pushing walls outward, or thermal. The sloped design creates a smaller interior volume near the ceiling, where the warmest air naturally rises and collects, concentrating heat in the upper space where smoke also gathers before finding its way through the roof vent. The exact intentions of Viking builders remain unclear, lost in the silence of unwritten construction knowledge passed only through apprenticeship and observation. The long fire runs down the center of the building like a glowing spine. You can see it from your sleeping platform. A channel perhaps 30 feet long, filled with embers that pulse orange and red in the darkness. There are no flames at this hour deep in the night, only coals. Yet the heat reaches you, radiating across the intervening space in waves you can almost see. Everyone knows the Vikings kept fires burning in their longhouses, but here is what they rarely tell you. These fires were not allowed to go out, sometimes for years at a time. The hearth was tended in shifts, a responsibility that rotated through the household. Letting the fire die completely was not merely inconvenient. In the depths of winter it could be catastrophic. Relighting a fire using iron, Flint and char cloth in a smoke-filled, freezing environment was difficult and time-consuming. More importantly, allowing the longhouse to fully cool meant the moisture in those turf walls could freeze solid, and the subsequent thaw would destabilize the entire structure. The fire was not just about warmth. It was about maintaining the integrity of your shelter itself. You watch as someone rises in the darkness, a thrall perhaps or an older child, and moves silently to the hearth. They place 2 fresh logs carefully onto the coals, positioning them to catch without smothering the heat source. Within minutes, small flames begin to lick upward, and you feel the subtle increase in radiant warmth. The wood is carefully chosen. Specialists disagree on whether Vikings preferred certain woods specifically for nighttime heating versus daytime cooking fire. Some evidence suggests dense hardwoods like oak for overnight burns, slow, steady heat with minimal flame, while faster burning birch and pine were used for cooking. When high heat and light were needed quickly, the smoke rises thick and acrid, but it does not choke you. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive aspect of longhouse life. Vikings lived in constant smoke yet survived to adulthood without the catastrophic lung damage you might expect. The smoke rises to the roof, where it finds its way out through a series of vents, holes deliberately left in the turf covering, adjustable by pulling or pushing wooden panels. But not all the smoke escaped. The evidence remains unclear whether Vikings suffered elevated rates of respiratory illness. Some skeletal remains show signs consistent with chronic smoke exposure, others do not. What is certain is that they had no choice but to adapt. Your sleeping space is a raised wooden platform running along the longhouse wall about 2 feet above the packed earth floor. You lie on a thick layer of straw, not hay but actual grain straw, hollow and air-trapping. Beneath the straw, the wooden planks of the platform are deliberately spaced with small gaps. Cold air from below can rise through these gaps, but the dense straw blocks it, creating a layer of trapped still air that insulates you from below. Here is the mainstream fact. Vikings slept on furs and under wool blankets. Here is the strange detail. The specific arrangement mattered as much as the materials. You are not simply covered by furs, you are layered. Against your skin, you wear a wool undertunic that you have not removed in weeks. Wool, even when damp with sweat, retains warmth. Over your body you have pulled a sheepskin, skin side out, wool side against you. The lanolin in the unwashed wool is slightly oily, water resistant, trapping air between the fibers. Over the sheepskin, another layer, a woven wool blanket, coarser than the sheepskin, heavier, and over that, if you are fortunate enough to be a person of status, a bearskin or sealskin, the ultimate outer layer that blocks drafts and adds substantial weight, compressing the layers beneath and eliminating air gaps where heat could escape. You shift position and the straw beneath you rustles loudly in the quiet longhouse. This sound is constant at night, 40 people turning, adjusting, seeking comfort on their platforms. The straw must be changed regularly, a fact that historians sometimes overlook. Straw compresses with use, losing its insulating properties. It also becomes infested with fleas, lice, and other parasites that thrive in the warm, dark environment of the longhouse. Scholars continue to puzzle over how frequently straw was replaced. Evidence from archaeological sites shows layers of compressed organic matter beneath sleeping platforms, suggesting months of accumulation. But written sources are silent on household maintenance routine. There is another element to your sleeping arrangement that modern people find particularly strange. You are not sleeping alone. Unless you are the Jarl or his wife, you share your sleeping platform with others. Body heat is shared freely. Children sleep pressed against adults. Siblings cluster together. Even unrelated members of the household sleep in close proximity. Privacy as we understand it does not exist. The collective warmth of bodies is not merely accepted. It is essential to survival. You become aware of the breathing around you, 40 sets of lungs drawing in the smoky air and exhaling warmth. Each human body is a furnace, producing heat through the constant metabolic process of staying alive. At rest, An adult human generates approximately 100 watts of heat energy, roughly equivalent to a bright incandescent light bulb. Multiply that by 40 people, and the longhouse contains 4,000 watts of biological heating, running continuously through the... Here is what seems obvious. More people equals more warmth. Here is the counterintuitive reality that specialists debate. There is an optimal density of human occupation in a longhouse, beyond which the benefits of shared body heat are negated by other factors. Too many people create too much moisture. Each person exhales approximately 1 liter of water vapor during 8 hours of sleep. In a sealed structure, this moisture has nowhere to go. It condenses on the cold walls, drips from the rafters, soaks into the straw bedding, and creates damp wool that loses its insulating properties. The longhouse must be large enough to house the extended family and their thralls, but not so packed that the humidity becomes dangerous. Medieval populations, implying they either adapted to the smoke or that the negative health effects were offset by other advantages of the lifestyle. The smoke serves another function you cannot directly observe, but can sense. It preserves the rafters above, constantly bathed in smoke, have become hard and dark, almost petrified. Meat hangs from these rafters, strips of fish, mutton, beef slowly curing in the smoke, becoming the preserved protein that will last through the winter. The smoke that irritates your lungs is simultaneously preventing microbial growth on your food stores. The smoke that blackens the walls is also repelling some insects and parasites. The longhouse is not merely a shelter. It is a complex ecosystem where every element serves multiple purposes. You look up, trying to see the roof structure through the smoke, but it is impossible. Somewhere above, perhaps 15 feet up, the turf roof rests on wooden rafters. In winter, snow accumulates on this roof, sometimes to depths of several feet. This snow counterintuitively acts as additional insulation, a thick blanket of frozen water that prevents heat from escaping upward. The evidence remains unclear on whether Vikings understood the insulating properties of snow or simply accepted it as an unavoidable consequence of winter. What is certain is that longhouses performed better thermally in winter under snow than in autumn or spring. When the roof was bare, you return to your sleeping platform, lying back down in your assigned space. The position of this platform in the longhouse is not random. It is a precise indicator of your status within the household. The warmest sleeping positions, closest to the hearth but furthest from the door, belong to the Jarl and his wife, their young children, and perhaps an honored elder. You are further from the fire. Your platform located perhaps 15 feet from the hearth. Beyond you, toward the walls and toward the door, the thralls sleep in the coldest positions. Here is the straightforward fact. Viking longhouses had sleeping hierarchies based on social status. Here is the detail that surprises modern audiences. The temperature variation between the warmest and coldest sleeping positions could be 10 degrees Celsius or more. The difference between comfortable sleep and shivering endurance was determined entirely by your position in the social order. Those closest to the fire also received the benefit of direct radiant heat, while those at the perimeter relied primarily on their own body heat, their layers, and whatever warmth reached them through convection of air currents. But the hierarchy is more complex than simple proximity to the fire. The positions nearest the door are coldest. Every time someone enters or exits, frigid outside air rushes in, displacing warm air. But the positions against the exterior walls can be even colder, as the walls themselves, despite their turf insulation, are still the primary boundary between the inside temperature and the killing cold outside. Scholars continue to puzzle over the exact sleeping arrangements in different types of longhouses. Some evidence suggests that the most valuable thralls, skilled craftspeople, or trusted household managers might sleep in moderately warm positions, while purely labor-based thralls suffered in the cold zones. Other evidence suggests a more rigid hierarchy based purely on free versus enslaved status. You are aware of the person sleeping beside you so close you can feel their warmth through your layers. This is not your spouse or your child, but another member of the extended household. Personal space is a luxury that cannot be afforded when survival depends on shared warmth. The evidence remains unclear on how Vikings navigated the social and psychological challenges of this extreme proximity. There are no written accounts of longhouse sleeping etiquette, no descriptions of how privacy was negotiated or how conflicts over space were resolved. What remains is the physical evidence. Sleeping platforms designed for multiple occupants, dimensions that suggest densely packed bodies, and the simple mathematical reality that surviving a Norwegian winter in a turf-walled building required you to sleep close enough to your neighbor to share body heat. You lie still, listening. The longhouse at night is not silent. It is filled with a constant low-level symphony of human and animal sounds. Someone coughs, a wet, phlegmy sound that echoes briefly before being absorbed by the turf walls. A child whimpers in sleep. One of the cows in the animal section shifts weight, and you hear the creak of the wooden partition, the soft thud of a hoof on packed earth. The fire crackles as a log settles. Someone's stomach gurgles audibly, the diet of preserved fish, porridge, and fermented dairy creating digestive sounds that would be embarrassing in modern contexts, but are simply part of the acoustic landscape here. Here is what documentaries rarely mention: the sounds of survival, the constant rustling of straw as 40 people shift positions through the night, seeking comfort on sleeping platforms that are too hard, too narrow, too crowded. The regular sound of someone rising to add fuel to the fire or to relieve themselves in the designated area at the far end of the longhouse. The wheezing and snoring of people sleeping in air thick with smoke, their respiratory systems working harder than they should. The dripping of condensation from the rafters, a regular percussion that marks the passage of time in the darkness. But there is one sound that cuts through all others, demanding attention: the wind. Outside, the winter storm is intensifying. You can hear it roaring across the landscape, screaming past the longhouse, shaking the turf roof. Occasionally, a particularly violent gust finds a gap in the walls or roof, and a whistling draft cuts through the interior, causing the fire to flare briefly. This sound is a constant reminder of what waits outside: wind that can drive the chill factor to lethal levels in minutes, cold that can freeze exposed skin in seconds, darkness that disorients and kills. Specialists disagree on how frequently Vikings ventured outside during the worst winter storms. Some evidence suggests they stayed inside for days at a time, only exiting when absolutely necessary to tend animals or retrieve stored supplies. Other evidence suggests a more regular pattern of outside activity, even in severe weather. What is certain is that the sound of the wind, heard from inside the relative warmth and safety of the longhouse, served as a constant acoustic reminder of the hostile environment and the thin barrier that separated life from death. You sense the change before you fully wake: a subtle shift in the air, a marginally increased brightness filtering through the smoke. Morning has arrived, though inside the longhouse, the difference between night and day is minimal. There are no windows, nothing that would allow the precious heat to escape, only the perpetual semi-darkness, broken by the glow of the fire, and occasionally a shaft of light when the door opens. You do not want to leave your sleeping platform. Under your layers, compressed by hours of sleep, a warm microclimate has developed around your body. The act of throwing off the blankets and skins, of standing and exposing yourself to the ambient air of the longhouse, is physically shocking. The temperature differential between your cocoon and the surrounding air could be 15 degrees or more. You see others around you making the same reluctant transition, sitting up slowly, wrapping a blanket around their shoulders before standing, moving immediately toward the fire. Here is the basic fact: Mornings in Viking longhouses were cold. Here is the counterintuitive detail. They were actually colder than the middle of the night. Through the night, even a tended fire gradually burns down, producing more coals and less flame, radiating less heat. The human furnaces have been at rest, producing minimal metabolic heat beyond basic survival needs. The coldest moment in the longhouse is typically just before dawn, when the fire is at its lowest and the outside temperature has reached its overnight minimum. The first task of the day, before food, before dressing for outside work, is rebuilding the fire, adding substantial wood, coaxing it back to full heat, restoring the thermal backbone of the household. You watch as someone, the person whose turn it is, kneels by the hearth, carefully arranging kindling in larger pieces, blowing gently on the coals to encourage flame. This is skilled work. Too aggressive, and you can smother the coals with ash. Too timid, and the new fuel will not catch. The fire will die, and the catastrophe of a cold hearth will have arrived. Within minutes, flames begin to rise, and you feel the immediate psychological relief. Even before the actual heat reaches you, the fire is alive again. The household is secure. Scholars continue to puzzle over the psychological impact of living in this state of constant thermal vigilance. Fire management was not a background task, but a central focus of daily life, requiring constant attention, planning and labor. Together preserved more warmth than individual finger protection. The mittens are wool, possibly with an outer layer of skin, and they are sized larger than the hand, creating dead air space around the fingers. Your feet face the most severe challenge. Inside, you may go barefoot or wear simple leather slippers. Outside, you need multiple layers, wool socks, possibly 2 pairs, and then substantial leather boots, maybe lined with fur or packed with straw. The boot design is critical, tall enough to prevent snow from entering, but flexible enough for walking. Some evidence suggests Vikings wrapped their lower legs with wool strips or leather straps over their boots, creating additional insulation for the vulnerable area between boot top and tunic hem. Specialists disagree on how common this practice was. Some argue it was universal in winter, others that it was limited to travelers or warriors who would be outside for extended periods. You notice something as you add layers. The smell intensifies. The same clothes have been worn for weeks or months. The same wool fibers that keep you warm also trap the volatile organic compounds of human sweat and body odor. Combined with the smoke smell permeating every fiber, the overall effect is overwhelming to anyone not acclimated. But you are acclimated. Everyone in the longhouse exists in the same olfactory environment, and the smell fades into unconscious background. The evidence remains unclear whether Vikings noticed or cared about body odor as a social concern. Some sagas mention bathing and grooming as marks of status, but daily hygiene as modern people understand it was impossible in winter when water was scarce and warming it required precious fuel. The morning meal is being prepared at the hearth. You smell it before you see it. A porridge of barley or oats, cooked in a large iron pot suspended over the fire. The smell is not appetizing by modern standards. Slightly burnt, bland, with an undertone of smoke. But your stomach responds immediately. You are hungry in a way modern people rarely experience. A hunger that comes from your body burning calories constantly just to maintain temperature. Here is the straightforward fact. Vikings ate high-calorie diets in winter. Here is the fascinating detail. The specific composition of that diet was carefully managed for thermal benefit. The morning porridge is mixed with fat, perhaps butter, perhaps rendered animal fat, whatever is available from store. Fat contains more than twice the calories per gram of carbohydrates or protein, and more importantly, it burns slowly in your metabolic furnace, providing sustained heat production through the morning hours of work. You receive your portion, a wooden bowl filled with thick hot porridge. The bowl itself is almost too hot to hold, but you cradle it in your hands deliberately, absorbing the heat through your palms. You blow on the surface, watching steam rise, and take your first bite. It is painfully hot, burning your tongue slightly, but you continue eating. The heat in your mouth, spreading down your throat into your stomach, is immediately comforting. Within minutes of finishing the meal, you feel warmer, not just psychologically but physically. Your body is converting those calories into heat. Your core temperature is rising slightly, and the metabolic rate increase will last for hours. But the meal serves another function that scholars continue to debate: social cohesion. Everyone eats together, gathered around the hearth, sharing the warmth and food simultaneously. The meal is a ritual that reinforces the household as a cooperative survival unit. Some evidence suggests that food distribution followed strict hierarchical patterns. The Jarl and his family eating first, getting the best portions, while thralls ate last from what remained. Other evidence suggests a more egalitarian distribution, at least in winter, when every member of the household needed maximum calories to survive and work. The evidence remains unclear on how often Vikings ate in winter. Some scholars argue for 2 substantial meals per day, morning and evening. Others suggest more frequent, smaller eating occasions. What is certain is that going hungry in a Viking longhouse in winter was not merely unpleasant. It was dangerous. Without adequate caloric intake, your body cannot maintain its temperature. Within a day of serious calorie restriction, your ability to work diminishes. Within several days, you risk hypothermia even inside the longhouse. Food was survival, and the careful management of winter stores was as critical as any other aspect of cold weather preparedness. The household is now fully awake and active. You observe the constant labor required to maintain the thermal survival system. Someone is bringing wood from the store, not a simple task, as the woodshed is outside, requiring a journey into the cold, selection of appropriate logs, and transport back inside. The wood brought in is cold, sometimes frozen, and must be stacked near the hearth to dry and warm before it can be burned efficiently. Frozen or damp wood produces more smoke and less heat. Here is what seems obvious: Vikings needed firewood to survive winter. Here is the staggering reality: a single longhouse household could consume several tons of wood over a winter. The evidence remains unclear on exactly how much, but archaeological studies of hearth ash deposits and calculations based on the heat output needed to maintain livable temperatures suggest numbers that would shock modern audiences. This wood had to be gathered during summer and autumn, cut to manageable lengths, split and stored under cover to season. The labor investment in winter heating alone was massive, requiring perhaps 1 full-time worker's effort just to maintain the wood supply. But wood was not the only fuel maintenance task. You watch as someone tends the straw in the sleeping areas, fluffing compressed areas, removing sections that have become too soiled or compressed to be effective, replacing them with fresh straw from the store. This too was a constant labor. Straw degrades quickly when slept on and must be managed daily to maintain its insulating properties. The soiled straw is not wasted. It will be composted with animal manure and eventually returned to the fields as fertilizer. But the labor of constantly cycling through straw supplies is substantial. The animals in their section require attention as well. They must be fed from stored hay. Their waste must be managed, though in winter this management often simply means letting it accumulate to be removed in spring, and their water supply must be maintained. In severe cold, water freezes, and melting ice or snow to water the animals requires fuel and labor. Specialists disagree on whether animals were watered daily in winter or whether they received most of their hydration from snow. What is certain is that maintaining livestock through winter required constant vigilance and labor. You notice something else. The distribution of labor follows patterns that reflect both status and capability. The heaviest work, bringing wood, hauling water, managing animal waste, falls to thralls and younger household members. The skilled work, fire tending, Food preparation, textile repair belongs to free household members, often women. The supervisory work, deciding when wood stores need replenishment, planning food distribution, organizing labor, belongs to the Jarl and his wife. Everyone works, but not everyone works the same. The evidence remains unclear on whether thralls received the same thermal protection, the same quality of clothing, the same access to food as free household members. Some evidence suggests a more egalitarian approach, born of practical necessity. Other evidence hints at hierarchies even in basic survival resources. You have been awake for several hours now, but the light inside the longhouse has barely changed. This is perhaps the most psychologically challenging aspect of Viking winter survival, the perpetual semi-darkness. The fire provides some light, but it is flickering, uncertain, casting dancing shadows that distort depth perception and create phantom movements in your peripheral vision. The smoke layer above dims what little light might filter down from the roof vent. The lack of windows means no natural light beyond what enters through the door when it briefly opens. Here is what seems straightforward. Vikings lived without electric lighting. Here is the counterintuitive reality. They also lived without most of the supplementary lighting sources you might assume. Candles were rare and expensive. Beeswax was precious, and tallow candles from animal fat were smoky and provided minimal illumination. Oil lamps existed, but were similarly expensive to operate, requiring rendered fat or imported oil. Most households used these light sources sparingly, if at all. The primary light source was the hearth fire, and when you moved away from it to the darker corners of the longhouse, you worked largely by feel and memory. Specialists continue to puzzle over how this affected Viking psychology and culture. Some argue that the long, dark winters contributed to the Viking emphasis on storytelling and oral tradition in darkness. People talk, recite sagas, share knowledge orally. Others suggests the darkness enforced a strong sense of spatial memory and physical awareness.